invite LeDerick Horne to New Hampshire. Let's work on this. Let's invite him. Let's start a real conversation. Let's move this forward. That's how we landed here tonight. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you Able New Hampshire's dear friend and longtime supporter, Dan Habib. Dan is a filmmaker at the University of New Hampshire's Institute on Disability and the creator of the nationally broadcast documentary film series Intelligent Lives and Mr. Connolly Has ALS, which are both rebroadcasting this month on public TV in honor of the ADA celebration, as well as the films Who Cares About Kelsey and Including Samuel. From 2014 to 2017, Dan served on the President's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities under President Barack Obama. And Dan, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lisa. It's so good to be with everybody here tonight. You know, we're all feeling kind of cooped up. So to see all these familiar faces, many of friends in the who are joining us tonight, really it's an honor and such an honor to be asked to introduce LeDerick Horne. Really, really a pleasure, because LeDerick is someone who's been a friend of mine for going 10 plus years now. LeDerick and I worked together back in 2010 to help launch a campaign called I Am Norm. And that was when I saw LeDerick in action for the first time, working with young people with and without disabilities, organizing, inspiring, motivating, firing people up. And ever since then, he and I have stayed in good touch and have collaborated around Intelligent Lives and many other things. And I've had the honor of seeing him present around the country and had a chance to have beer together. And it's just such a good choice to bring LeDerick to New Hampshire to fire us up. So I want to just say a few things about LeDerick and then hand off to him. You know, when you think about someone like LeDerick, you have to ask, how do you go from sitting in a special education classroom, which I'm sure he'll talk about, as a child, to speaking on behalf of people with disabilities at the White House, at the United Nations, and departments of education all across the US and schools? You know, how do you transform a learning disability or work with a learning disability and transform that into a lifelong passion for the art of spoken word as a poet, as a beautiful poet? How do you expand your family's already impressive civil rights legacy to include tireless advocacy for the rights of all people with disabilities, which is what LeDerick lives and breathes every day? And if you're LeDerick, you just do it. You just find a way. You don't stop. You keep pushing. You keep pushing. We were just talking about that earlier. You got to keep pushing. And as you'll hear, I'm sure more from LeDerick, he was labeled with a learning disability as a child. But now he really defies any and all labels. None of us are big fans of labels anyway. He is a noted spoken word poet. He's a big advocate for people with disabilities. He's a founding member of a national nonprofit. He's the co-author of a definitive book on hidden disabilities. He's a bridge builder between learners and leaders all over the country. And as you're about to experience, he's definitely an ambassador for everybody, whether you have a disability or not. So LeDerick, it is such an honor to have you with us tonight. And thank you so much for virtually coming to New Hampshire.
And it's good to see your face, and thank you for that introduction. As you said, we've been friends for a while. And he didn't add that he also wrote the intro to the book that I co-authored a few years ago. So thank you. And Lisa and everybody else, thank you for helping to organize this event. And as Dan said, give us this opportunity to be able to connect with each other. I have a friend and colleague in Oklahoma who says it's not social distancing because we're still being social, at least to some degree, but we have to physically distance with each other. So I have a presentation prepared today or this evening that I think will take us about 45 minutes. And then I think if we're going to allow for a little bit of Q&A and discussion thereafter. And I have a PowerPoint that I've put together to help us in this. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully that comes up. All right. Okay, so that's me. I just want to give you just a heads up. I am not in my own home. I was at home earlier today, I guess on my second or third Zoom call of the day, and then all of a sudden the internet shut off. So I'm a couple blocks away in my brother's home, which is actually still kind of being worked on, but he was kind enough to let me use his internet service. So hopefully the internet doesn't die on this block, and we'll be okay to get through this. So yeah, as it was said, I'm a poet, speaker, advocate. I have a BA in mathematics. I work on the national, state, and local levels with a number of different partners. I really think of the mission of my work is around improving the outcomes of folks with disabilities. And I also serve on the governing board of I'm on the board of a few different organizations, but in particular, the governing board for I, which is a mentoring organization. At its core, it does mentoring for students who are labeled with learning disabilities and ADHD. If you're interested in connecting with me afterwards, please take a look at the website. I'm also active on all the social media platforms, so you can find me just about everywhere online. I'm going to be sharing a few resources, and one of them, particularly this framework around disability identity development, is drawn from the book that I co-authored with Margot Izzo, called Empowering Students with Hidden Disabilities: A Path to Pride and Success. Margot and I met back in 2010. She's a OSEP director, runs a number of federally funded programs out of the Nassau Center at The Ohio State University. And we met each other through some of her work as a director, and invited me to campus. And over that time, we became friends and started talking about wanting to make a book. And we firmly believe that our book is an embodiment of this idea to come out of the disability rights movement, that there should be nothing about us without us. I have a learning disability. Margot has ADHD. And so the resources in that book are us drawing from what we know the best practices are in the field, particularly around transition services, self-advocacy, self-determination. But all that information is filtered through the eyes of two people who have actually lived the experience of having a disability. So for our topic for this evening, we're touching upon this idea of race and disability and the intersectionality of it. I have been asked pretty pointedly throughout the course of my career to really speak on issues related to disability. I always have worked hard to find a way of intertwining issues around race and class, and all of the sort of identifiers as a part of that conversation. But I just want to start out by saying just a few ground rules, right? So first is I come in peace. I may say a few things here that are controversial, that may actually be upsetting to some folks. I'm not doing that by any intention. My idea really here is to provoke thought and point to issues that I think are important. So I come with love, from a place of love. I don't have all the answers, right? The issues that we're wrestling with today as a nation are very complicated. They're issues that we've actually been wrestling with since before this country was a country. And so, I'm just doing my best to provide supports to the topic that we're addressing today. Also, as far as the question of race, I'm going to focus primarily on the Black experience, but I just want to, from the beginning of this, want to say that I'm an ally of all people, and the ways in which I'm framing it, I'm hoping will be able to be addressed to larger communities beyond just the Black community. And and then also just even within the realm of Black community, it's not a homogeneous community. There's a lot of diversity within that. And so, again, just doing my best to sort of add to our dialogue here. Okay, this is something that in some of my talks I like to begin with. I don't think we're going to open it up to like Q&A and back and forth, so I'll just sort of talk through this. But I don't know if anyone recognizes this, but maybe in the chat, I can see the chat. Maybe if someone wants to drop what they think this is. But there was a time where we used to all get on airplanes and fly around and walk through these scanners, right? And the TSA, they have you put your hands up, the machine scans you. And I have the experience of every time I go through one of those scanners, setting it off, of generating one of these little blobs on the figure of my body. And I always set it off, where the sort of spot shows up is around my collar and on my back. And I'm not exactly sure why, but I have a theory. And it's drawn from my experience looking at issues related to people with disabilities and some of the challenges that are sort of common with air travel. Also some of the common challenges that have to do with the transgender community and going through these scanners. So basically what it is that when you stand on the other side of that scanner, the TSA agent has to make a decision about what your gender is, right? And so I think the reason why I set it off is because I'm selected as being a man, and that maybe my hair is within the algorithm that gets loaded when they select a man. My hair is too long for a man, right? And then also there are Black women who have continuously told TSA that their algorithm, for those of us who have locks or have braids, looks at it as an anomaly, right? As if there is something wrong or something in the hair instead of just having hair that's, you know, sort of groups or in locks. And so I think what happens is they pick man, and I'm setting it off for these two reasons. And so it's my hair falling on my collar and my hair running down my back that is setting it off. And the reason I wanted to pick this image and sort of put our attention to this initially is because I want us to be reminded that in designing any system, whether it be a scanner, a community, a school, a transportation system, that system is designed to a norm, right? There's some sort of standard human being that is expected to pass through that system. And those of us who have challenges in being able to go through that system, it's generally a sign that the system was not designed to support us, right? And if it's not intentionally designed, right, outside of us, and just in the way in which it's functioning, it's not taking into account our experiences, our needs, our reality. Okay, so just a little bit of my background. I come to this work not as a educator, not as a parent, but as a person who's lived the experience of having a disability. I was first diagnosed with having a learning disability when I was in the 3rd grade. I was placed in initially a resource room, which was a teacher storage closet, and into a self-contained special education classroom at the end of the hall in my building. That left me with a lot of challenges, a lot of insecurities, a lot of social and emotional scars that even now as an adult, I am still working through today. I was in special ed from halfway in the 3rd grade in special education on an IEP until I graduated from high school. And towards the end of my time in high school, I got very fearful because I did not know what was available to me after graduation. I knew I would graduate, but I just had no idea what was going to happen to me after that, particularly since I always struggled with issues related to spelling and reading comprehension and doing math and being able to pay attention. And so in the winter of my junior year, I had what I describe as an emotional breakdown, which gave me an opportunity to really begin to question who I was as a human being. And there were a number of people that I really drew from within this period of questioning. One was my man Einstein and theory of relativity and the idea that certain phenomenon will appear in certain ways if you look at different points of view. And so I started thinking about what could I do to shift my point of view about what my future was. I also began digging into like philosophy. First time I ever read any of the Buddha's writings and his reflections on suffering. And then, as it was said in my introduction, my family has a deep history in the civil rights movement. So looking at King, and particularly Malcolm X, and his stance around identity and what it meant to be a man and a citizen, and how it really had to be something that you had to claim for yourself within the society. And so I was fortunate. I built myself up. My IEP team recommended me going to a local community college to begin my education. And so I did that, and I was fortunate to be a part of an excellent disability support program at a local county college here called Middlesex County College, which really taught me what it was to be a student with a mind that worked differently than other students. It's the first time I started using accommodations. We're getting feedback. Someone can, you can mute yourself. Maybe that was me. I'm not sure. So yeah, so I really blossomed as a student. Realized that I was really good at two things with having the accommodations, having the support. I had to do an entire year of remedial classes, but I realized I was good at math. Also realized that I was really good at writing. So not spelling. Spelling's still a big issue for me, but writing. And so it took me 5 years, but I transferred with a 3.75 GPA. Eventually went on to New Jersey City University, where I got a degree in math, and I minored in fine art. And in my last semester at university, I was recruited by the New Jersey Department of Education's Office of Special Education to begin doing work around youth leadership and development here in our state. And after doing that for a couple of years out of college, I began working nationally. One of the first organizations I connected with was NAACP, the National Association of State Directors of Special Ed. And then the folks at I were getting started, so I began working with them and began doing this work around inclusion and improving the outcomes of folks with disabilities. So the photos on your screen is very young LeDerick graduating from kindergarten, and then my high school graduation photo, and I really appreciate that peach fuzz there. That's funny. And down in the corner there is a shot of me at New Jersey City University. I was a part of another disability support program there that offered me support. And then it's one of my proudest days, graduation day. I'm there with my brother and then my third mom. And the reason why I do this work is I think one is I'm very fortunate that I think my skill set and my passions and my life story all kind of come in line. If anyone knows me, you get to know me really well. I actually am not all that crazy about doing public speaking. It's always very, very stressful for me. I'm a bit more of an introvert than anything. But I firmly believe that education is, if not the, at least one of the key civil rights issues of our time. And I also think we have just tremendous untapped talent within the community of people with disabilities that the human race is not really taking advantage of. And so I've been proud to be able to do this work all over the US and a little bit internationally. Okay, one of the ideas that come out of our book is that Margot and I both firmly believe that disability should be a positive identifier, that there shouldn't be anything negative associated with having a disability. And so we actually developed a framework for disability identity development that we call the Path to Disability Pride. And the path has a figure to it. And this is a photo of the figure. I want to just walk through it because I think this idea about what disability is, and particularly like how do we get to a point where our practices in community and in school to help someone really embrace this idea that they have a disability and that they are a person with a disability. So we have it actually divided into two sections. One is the path to disability shame. The other is the path to disability pride. And the reason that is because all these different stages come from Margot and I looking at our own lives as people with disabilities, also the lives of all the folks, the narratives of all the folks that we've worked with over the years, as well as some of the people that we interviewed for the book. And we kept hearing some of the common stages coming up. And the reality is that many of us actually have to kind of go to some dark places where we're experiencing a lot of shame before we get to a point where we're really experiencing pride. And so we wanted to honor the totality of that journey. And so it's captured within the different stages of this figure. So I just want to go through the stages. So in the center, we have some core issues that many of us wrestle with. So the first one is challenges. If you're someone like me who's born with a disability, those challenges will oftentimes start showing up pretty early on. And those can be issues around communication, perception, mobility, social interactions, but just exhibiting some sort of challenges. Then there's this searching stage that oftentimes involves a family, or we're just trying to come up with a label, some sort of idea, going to specialists, trying to figure out what exactly is going on, with a young person, and it's also oftentimes challenging because we're looking for something that embodies the totality of the person we see in front of us, right? So not just the challenges, but also their gifts. And then the awareness stage is really key. Ideally, this is the stage where you get some sort of diagnosis, some greater sort of understanding about what's going on with the young person. And we really look at the awareness stage as being a point of divergence, where if disability is presented to a family and to a young person in a way which is asset-based, where we're leaning more into strengths and less into deficits, we can set them up to move more quickly along the pride side of the framework. But if all we're looking at is deficits and what a person can't do or not good at, and just using language around impairments and what have you, we're setting someone up to move along the shame side. So on the shame side, the stages we have here, first one is non-acceptance, and I'm sure we've all, particularly middle school, high school, met that young person who has a disability, well documented. You can see it, but it's just like, no, I don't have a disability. Right? Not willing to accept it as a part of who they are. The next stage is disability shame. Again, a lot of us are walking around carrying a lot of shame and embarrassment that comes along with being a person with a disability and how we're treated and positioned within society. Rejecting supports, right? Like, I'm not using those accommodations. I'm not going into that room to get that support. You even can be an awesome teacher and an awesome support, but they'll reject you if they closely connect you to their identity as a person with a disability, and there's a lot of shame associated with that. Maladaptive behavior, our population is unfortunately involved. A lot of drug use, promiscuous sexual behavior, connecting with sort of negative social groups. A lot of that is about self-medication, right? And oftentimes trying to surround ourselves with people who accept us and build us up, just as we present ourselves. And then the last one in this side of the framework is risk of underachievement. Again, just this idea that many people with disabilities aren't living up to their fullest potential. Now on the pride side, we have the first one is acceptance, right? And I'm going to come back to this a little bit later on, but this is, I think, really at the core of a lot of the work, particularly internally, that people who come from and identify with multiple identity groups have to wrestle with. Identity is very complicated. And so the acceptance piece is really about how do you incorporate disability into the totality of how you describe yourself, of who you are as a person. Self-disclosure, we heard that this was recognized that this was a really important stage for many of our young people, and particularly for people with quote unquote hidden disabilities, being able to just talk to somebody, right, about who you are, what you need, what your needs are. That self-disclosure piece was a big stage for many of us, whether it be initially just sort of talking to one person, or then getting to a point where you can self-disclose more freely in the larger world. Using supports, to just all the different supports that are available, accommodations, the people around us, being able to ask for help, and then actually really knowing and being able to connect with the things that provide that help. Self-advocacy, getting to a point where you understand what your rights are, right? Where you can communicate those rights effectively with other people, where you're practicing leadership within your community, your education, right? Like, this was an important stage for many of us. And connection to the disability community. And this is something that Margaret and I were really pushing forward, and we think this is important for our field, particularly when we think about it within the context of preparing young people to have successful lives as adults. There's tremendous strength and value that comes from connecting with other people who have had your lived experience. And so, we look at it as being like an important, and for many of us, it is oftentimes a moment that allows us to accept our disability, is when we meet somebody who's had a similar experience. So connecting to the disability community, and then that all leads to being a person that exhibits or communicates having a degree of disability pride. And it's not only being a self-advocate and speaking up for yourself, but also, you know, we talk about it in the book as being someone who also understands that they're a part of this larger community, and many times wants to give back to that community in some sort of way. This is not linear. You know, we settled on this figure 8 symbol for the figure because there are many of us that kind of go back and forth in different stages in order to get to a point where we actually can say, yeah, I'm proud to be a person with a disability. And it's also not terminal. Like, it's not like you hit that point and then you're just done, right? Like, a lot of us have to do a lot of work in order to maintain that pride. So in the acceptance piece, again, this identity is complicated, right? So there are a number of ways in which I describe myself, right? So like, I'm from New Jersey, I'm an artist, I'm a man, I'm an African-American, I'm a person with a disability, I'm a person with a learning disability. There are all these different ways in which we describe ourselves. And I have had to work very hard over the course of my life to put all those pieces together and to integrate them to create a cohesive whole, which is LeDerick Horne. And I think that's an experience that we all have to go through, right? Into looking at all the diverse ways in which just within ourselves, we describe ourselves, and just accepting all of that, right? So another reason why I do this work, and this is where I really want to kind of get into the issues of race and the intersection of race and disability, is because civil rights is sort of a family tradition for me. That photo off to the side there, those two folks, that's my grandfather and my grandmother, photo taken, I think, right here in New Brunswick, New Jersey. My grandfather is Simeon Horne. He was president of our local chapter, the New Brunswick chapter of the NAACP, during the heart of the civil rights movement. He was really big on approaching companies, local companies here, to change their hiring practices so they were more acceptant, and providing opportunities for people of color. I was talking to a friend of his a few months ago who was talking about his experience, him and other members of the NAACP, of integrating a pool locally, a public pool here that was all white. And they fought the good fight, and the city eventually buckled and said that they would integrate the pool. But they ended up, like, the day that they were supposed to open it up to blacks, they ended up closing the pool down to everybody. But this is just an example of the sort of fights that he was involved in. Got a lot of people jobs, and was never afraid to stand up to people in positions of power. He attended the March on Washington, and this photo is a photo that really no one has ever seen. I think I've shown this publicly only one or two other times. But that's an original photo of Martin Luther King giving the I Have a Dream speech that my grandfather took. When he passed away, we dug through his closet, and I have all these photos from the March on Washington. So that's one of them. You can see he was very close to the podium during the speech. And, you know, I'm very conscious of my experience as an African-American male, and I am one of the people who have been taking part in the protests over Black Lives Matter, and really the call to address issues around police brutality. For me, I really began to really get engaged with this around the murder, and I would actually say the lynching of Ahmaud Arbery. I'm a part of a collective of runners called Black Men Run. We have chapters all over the country, and I just did completed my first marathon last fall. And yeah, so a bunch of us were involved in doing a run, sort of a virtual protest when it was Ahmaud's birthday. And of course, it's just like during this whole time of COVID, you know, we just kept seeing more and more images, you know, within a very small time frame of people who were being killed, if not by vigilantes in their community, then by police officers. And Here in New Jersey, we did a very, very large protest, thousands of people. I think I saw at one point the news reported 10,000 people who assembled, and I got to hold the lead banner for George Floyd during that protest here in Newark. And this is the issue of police brutality, the unjust murder of people of color in our communities. Unfair police practices and criminal justice practices is something that Black people have really been dealing with and addressing really since we got here, since like 1619. And particularly the issue around lynching. If you don't know the work of Ida B. Wells, she's did a lot of work in the early 1900s around this issue, 1800s and 1900s around this issue. And it's someone I think we should all know about. She's oftentimes considered to be one of the first investigative reporters, and she did a lot of work around this issue. Just some stats, and I don't know New Hampshire and with this organization and the people on the call how focused you in are on policing, but throughout this entire time, particularly on social media, but throughout the different networks that I've been associated with, then as organizations reach out to me, I've been saying to them that I think this policing issue is really core for all of us, but particularly for people with disabilities. And here's one of the stats that I think really points to that. Almost half of all, this is a study that was done back in 2016, almost half of all people who die at the hands of police are people with some kind of disability. So this is, I think if you're an organization that's doing disability work, the issue around policing and criminal justice reform, I think is still very core to the work that we should all be doing. A few other issues or stats related to Black experience and experience of people with disabilities. So in our school, and we oftentimes have this conversation about the school and prison pipeline. Part of that really begins around our discipline practices. So here, 1 in 4 Black males with IEPs receive out-of-school suspension compared to 1 in 10 white males with IEPs. So a definite over-representation, over-disciplining of Black girls who are in special education. And then particularly with this issue around police brutality, there's been a lot of conversation about Black men, but I think it's important that we also realize that there are a lot of Black women of color who are also experiencing this. And so looking again into our schools, here's an interesting stat. Black girls are the only group of girls that are overrepresented across the continuum of school discipline. So suspensions, arrests, referral to law enforcement, is overly represented along that continuum. And the way in which I think about these problems and how we got to where we are today, at least for me, there's a part of me as a businessman and as a person who understands a lot of this is related to issues connecting to class. I oftentimes think of this around, or try to frame it around a lack of investment in communities of color, right? So I am broadcasting, doing this Zoom call right now in Franklin Township. I am in a Black community. I'm in a home that my grandfather, my brother and I's grandparents built in the 80s, a lot that they purchased, I think in the 50s. And the reason why we're here is because of this practice of redlining, which really through incentives and being able to back mortgages and what have you, basically reinforce Black communities as staying in its contiguous spaces. And particularly when we think about how we end up where we are now, where we have these tremendous gaps in wealth between whites, and Blacks, and other communities of color. So much of that has to do with home ownership, right? And the way in which home ownership is an opportunity to build just generational wealth, particularly over time. And there are very systematic ways in which we, as a nation, did not invest in Black communities and therefore, we're left with this very, very important resource of just having capital to be able to, whether it be educating your children or providing medical supports or what have you, or pursuing a higher education, where this is just another example of it, sort of injustice. And I think about it again as a lack of investment. And then also it's just looking at this one example with the redlining and property values and communities of creation. There's a connection that this has to disability as well. One of the things I think which has become apparent with COVID is that people of color are passing away, particularly people in the Black community are passing away at a disproportionately higher rate than whites. And there are a number of factors associated with that. And some of it is the sort of jobs that we're in, where we're forced to interact with the public, forced to interact with additionally contaminated materials, things along those lines. But also the communities we live in, the lack of investment, you're gonna have environmental factors. This community that I'm in now, it just so happens that they're just a couple hundred feet away from an industrial area. There's just a few blocks away a mini dump and a dumping site, a commercial dump, and a concrete factory and all these other things. And so when we think about that, the elementary school that I went to, I believe I read a report that said that they found unusually high levels of lead in the water. So this lack of investment builds, particularly over generations, and can lead to a lot of the disparities that we're seeing today. So now the question of responding, and I'm putting this presentation together really just to help you guys sort of have a jumping off point to have larger conversations within your state, within your organization. The question is like, how does an organization respond to this moment now? And whether it be issues related to race, disability, or race and disability. And I think it's really important that we go beyond just your own personal efforts, right? Within your circle of friends, you as individuals, and that we really take a look at organizations, right? So our nonprofits, our business associations you're connected with, agencies, the schools in which you work or have connections with, really look at systems and really organizations and companies. And that's the space in which to do a lot of this change. And I'm saying this too because I have been throughout the past few months, when people come to me, I will say, well, what is your organization doing? And oftentimes people want to talk about the friend they have or the kid they helped, these very individual sort of things. But it is the way in which we create change, and lasting change, is by shifting the systems and the practices within the organizations that we practice. So this was just some information that was coming through the news that really, I think, spoke to how to respond, right? So one thing is, we have to go beyond just making statements, and particularly beyond just releasing that Instagram square, black background, light text, using the right hashtag or what have you, going beyond just the words, right? To really making statements about what are we for, right? What do we want to see created in this world? And again, not just signaling, right? But also addressing what are our actions, particularly as it really pertains to hiring, right? Representation in leadership, representation on our boards, right? How diverse is that? And I mean that, as far as race, but also as far as disability. That term, nothing about us without us, really speaks, you can think about that racially, you can also think about that as far as disability goes, and ableism goes, right? Like within all those different identity groups, if your organization is really serious about creating a more equitable society, we should have representation across the board, right? And really in hiring and in our leadership position. And we've seen, right, this sort of shift, in the public dialogue of Uganda, there's still a lot of focus, of course, on policing and police practices, but also companies, organizations, states have been working pretty diligently now to address a lot of issues around symbols, right? So I never thought that, you know, the NASCAR was going to ban the Confederate flag. That was amazing to see. My father, I lost my father within the past couple of months. My father was a huge Redskins fan, and now the Redskins, and I've always had an issue with the name and the logo. They're even considering changing their name now as a nod to it being offense to so many people. What I want to challenge this audience with, though, is that so much of this is very symbolic, right? None of this is going to change that wealth gap, right? That so many people and families of color experience. What can make a difference around that are things like hiring practices, like changing the policies to make sure that the supports and services that we have to offer are more accessible to people of color. Some of that can be as simple as the sort of imagery and representation you have on things like flyers and websites, the language that you use, but also around the teams you build and the folks you hire and the diversity of the staff and their commitment to be able to do outreach and work in a variety of different communities. I want to say here that I was listening to a talk from an attorney, and he phrased it really well. He was saying that, you know, none of this is necessarily our fault, right? Like the white folks on here don't and have not within their lifetime owned slaves. You know, the history of racism that we've had in this country is something that we've all inherited. And it has found a way to be very adaptable and exist within the systems in which we've all inherited today. And I think the work before all of us is to just look at what have we inherited, and then what do we want to do to change it to make sure that we have a future which is dramatically different than the reality that we have today. When to address organizational issues around race and disability, particularly the disproportionality piece. Well, this is one of my favorite proverbs. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. And the second best time is right now. So I think particularly within the Black community, some of the frustrations that many of us have is that we never should have gotten to the point where we are today. Really a lot of the requests and demands that people of color are making, and I think that's also true for people with disabilities, these are things that we've been asking for generations. So I think there's a value in acknowledging that, but like now is the time, right? Now is the time to start making these changes. And particularly when you start challenging organizations, whether it be in the nonprofit space or for-profit or agencies, you'll start getting sort of like pushback and statements like this that'll say things like, we don't have the time to work on these issues related to diversity, or this is not the focus of our work. This is not the core reason why our organization exists. And I would just make the argument that building a diverse team, having diverse outreach, diverse leadership, diverse hiring practices, this is the work, right? Like this is actually it. And particularly for organizations that want to serve the communities of people with disabilities. Disability is one of those categories which reaches across all of it. And so that diversity is key. And there's this great Abraham Lincoln quote that if I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. Like, this is how you sharpen your axe. This is how you make your organizations more effective. I do a workshop on leadership and leadership styles. And I always say the more diverse your team is, the more different perspectives you have and bringing to bear to solve a problem, the better off your team is. And then just in closing, just a few things. One is, this is a resource. So a few years ago, I created this series of videos. So there are a total of 7 videos, but there are 6 people that I feature within them. And it's called Celebrating Black History and People with Disabilities. It's a playlist on YouTube. It's also on my public page, on Facebook. So you can check this out. And a number of educators and different agencies have been playing these, particularly for young people, to just sort of introduce them to the array of folks who are out here in the world and who have lived in the past, who are folks with disabilities. And just 2 of the folks who are featured within the series. One is Robin Cost-Lewis, who is a poet. Her book that is award-winning is Voyage of the Sable Venus and Other Poems. And Robin Cost-Lewis, I believe, was an Arabic scholar. She was out to dinner with a group of friends, went into a coat room, lights off, and no one told her that the coat room had an open floor. So she fell down a staircase and sustained a number of injuries, including a traumatic brain injury. And after, I think about a year of recovery, the doctors told her that her traumatic brain injury was such that she would only be able to write 1 sentence a day. And so she was determined that she would write the best sentence she could every day. And that process allowed her to write and publish her first book of poetry, which became award-winning, which is the one there, Voyage of the Sable Venus. And her work really looks at it examines the representation of Black women by Western art. And then the last one, and I'll leave us on this, is I talk about Bradley Lomax. So Bradley Lomax is one of the people we should all know about, particularly within disability history, but just the overall history of the United States. Bradley Lomax was a independent living activist working in Oakland, California, a contemporary of Ed Roberts. And he was also a member of the Black Panther Party. Both him and his aide were members of the Black Panther Party. One of the films that's become really popular during COVID has been Crip Camp. If you watch that, and it is a big part of it is the story of the 504 sit-in. You'll know, and it's sort of a snippet in the story within that documentary, but part of the reason why that sit-in was able to sustain itself, and they have the record for the longest occupation of a federal building in US history. The reason why we have 504, and we're able to force that law to happen, and its protections is a civil rights law, so that you can't be discriminated against as a person with a disability, but also a law that is very much focused on access. Part of the reason that they were able to stay in that building and force that law is because Bradley Lomax reached out to the Black Panther Party. And I think it's important, particularly now, because the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense began as an organization dealing with the issue of police brutality in the Black community. And although when we think about the Black Panthers, we tend to think about a lot of Black men with leather jackets and long guns. Most of their members were women, and some of their most successful programming was centered around providing meals, particularly for young people in the Black community. And so those protesters were able to stay in that building in part because the Black Panthers recognized the work they were doing and provided hot meals for those protesters. And so there was this moment of intersectionality where people who were fighting for their rights as human beings, as American citizens, where they came together. And it is my hope that a similar sort of combination of efforts, and I think it's part of the magic of this moment today, is that you just don't have Black people or people of color out in the streets. It's everybody sort of coming together at this moment to say, what can we do and how can we make this work? So I'll stop there, and if we want to take questions, I'd love to be a part of that conversation.
Hi, everybody. My name is Isadora Rodriguez Lachendre. I just want to take a moment to thank LeDerick for this opportunity to discuss the intersection of race and disability. I want to give the audience participants an opportunity to ask him questions, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more about what people's impressions are to what he shared with us. Does anyone have anything they want to share?
And I have the chat up. I'm not always great at reading out loud, but I'll keep an eye. But if anyone wants to unmute, we can talk.
Hi, LeDerick. My name is Forrest Butterfree. How are you doing?
I am excellent, sir. And yourself?
I'm doing awesome. Your presentation was very interesting, and I have some history with the life on the label of disability to live on my own independently, and I live in an apartment, and I just want to have a quick recap. Question is that what is your perspective on independent living?
So, Forrest, thank you for that question. I think independent living has always been one of the cornerstones of the fight for people with disabilities, and particularly when, I wish it was a bigger part of the history we taught about the United States. That move from institutionalization that happened, and the disability rights movement, and us taking to a point where people are living more openly. But we still have a lot of that work to do, right? I think it is one of those inalienable rights, right? Is to be able to live with as much independence as possible, and it's something that all of us are entitled to. I also know that that part of this fight is also a fight that's cultural, right? That we have to have within our families and within our communities, so that all of us know that no matter how you're labeled, like, there is a way, right? And we should have this standard that your child should grow up and be an adult living on their own. And I don't care how challenging that might seem. There's someone in the United States that has figured out, that's like one of the great things that I picked up from hanging out with Dan Habib. Is like, there's somewhere out there, someone has figured out how to do this. And we can't be discouraged, and we can't be lazy, right? Like, we have to be willing to do the work, not only as families, but also as communities, to make sure that we're supporting everyone. And Forrest, if I can just add a personal story, my father was a wheelchair user for the last 12 years of his life. And I worked very hard to make sure that he was able to have as much independence as possible. But a big part of that was also about, we're getting ready to celebrate the ADA, like having access to the larger community, right? And one of the things I want us to all be on guard during this time of COVID is in a restaurant not too far away from me, I just saw they were doing open air dining, and decided to put the dining in the ADA's parking spots, right? So, me having to go in and tell the owner that this is a problem, that you cannot do this. These are things that we all need to keep our eyes open for. And that lack of accessibility and independence, I think particularly we deal with more of this sort of digital world, those same divides, those same barriers to access also exist. And so I think so much of it is about us just being conscious as we're building and we're setting these things up, that they need to work for everybody. It's important. It helps us all be more independent. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat. I'll take them in order. The first one says, thank you, LeDerick from New Jersey. We're so grateful to hear your voice and learn from you. What would you say to younger self-advocates who might not feel comfortable with their disability within their community, particularly for young Black students with disabilities?
Yes, it's part of the reason why I created the series, right? Because I don't know if the video series around celebrating Black history and people with disabilities, because I don't think we do a good enough job of celebrating all the awesome people who are alive now and who have been alive that are a part of our community as Black people and are also a part of our community as people with disabilities. So like one of the guys I like to highlight right now is Damon John, who's on Shark Tank, who's a multimillionaire, and is dyslexic, right? And has talked very openly about that. I think it's part of the value of having artists out in the world like Dan, who are creating films. Like I reached out to him immediately upon seeing the trailer for Intelligent Lives, because I think he did such a great job of presenting a number of different experiences, but also two families of color, and two young adults with intellectual disabilities who are out here in the world and thriving and dealing with challenges and what have you. One of the things that I really encourage, and again, it's looking at our organizations and our institutions within the Black community. One of the foundational institutions of support has been the Black church. So whether it be a church or whatever place of worship you go to, they're generally like ministries and like subgroups within the church that are focused on dealing with specific issues, right? And so I know at many of the churches in my area, there's like around economics and helping people to get out of debt and things like that. There should be a disability ministry in Black churches, right? Where we're creating a space where people can be brave and have these conversations and get supports from each other. I also think that I think within all of our communities, there's a role that particularly our young adults have, our high school students, our middle school students, and I visit a lot of schools all over the country, and I know in my own experience, like a lot of our varsity athletes in high school are kids who have disabilities, right? And some of those students are oftentimes people of color as well, if that's the kind of community you come from. So, it maybe starts small. It's maybe one person feeling empowered to tell their story, but tell your story. Open up about your experience. Mom and dad and grandma and uncles and aunties, when you're in the grocery store, you should be talking to people, right? Like it's a good time to say, hey, let me tell you about this kid I know or this member of my family, because you never know who's out there. But disability is so broad and reaching that it touches all of us. So I think sharing that story and then also leveraging our organizations is a good way to help normalize the experience of having a disability.
So another question in the chat is jumping off of Forrest's question about independent living. Could you speak to the current state of mass incarceration in the US and how it relates to the intersection of race and disability? Do you think deinstitutionalization advocacy has a role in ending mass incarceration in the US? Thanks. Grateful to be listening.
Yeah, and again, there are a bunch of ways in which I'm going to approach that. So let me just take one, and this will maybe even be a bit controversial. I have had a lot of positive interactions with the police over the course of my life, right? I went to college with two guys and stayed in the dorms with two guys, one that became a customs agent, the other that became a federal marshal. Both of them also had hidden disabilities, I might add. And, even members of my family who have had issues where we've had to call the police, when I think of the police, my own personal experience, there are an array of positive faces that show up. That being said, I know that my experience is not the experience that everybody has, right? And I still understand the need to do that fight and to make sure that practice is done more equitably. But I'm mentioning this to say that I am conscious of the fact that I think we have constructed our society in a way where we are asking police to do way too much, right? That there is a place, right, to have trained counselors to come out and deal with people who are maybe having mental health issues. And even within the police, better training around being able to recognize. Like, I oftentimes get very upset because if you spend any time around someone, you know, and particularly enough people who are maybe on the spectrum or have an intellectual disability, you get a sense of what to like look for, right? And of course, not everybody is the same, but there are some times where I see some of these videos of police shootings where I was like, yo, this is a person who's in a moment of crisis right now, right? But this is someone who their behavior may look quote unquote abnormal, but you know, they're just a person who is dealing with X or Y issue, right? And so doing a better job of making sure we're training folks, I think will help to mitigate some of this. But it's also on us as a society, right? Like, we can't go from breaking down institutions where people were placed in the past to just having them out without having that independent living component, without having a very well orchestrated system of supports that reaches out to everybody and can do a better job of catching everyone. I think that is part of the conversation that comes around what we do with funding as far as policing goes and putting it into other areas of support. But yeah, it can't just be a question of us sending people to jail, right? Like that as a society is not helping anyone. It's scary when you think about the US as being the country in the world that has the largest population of people who are in prison. And then when you combine that, right, the disability piece with the piece around race and the historical role that policing has had for people of color, and particularly for Black people going through slavery and coming out of slavery, you've got intersectionality in a way which is very scary, right? And so, yeah, I think, again, a lot of it comes down to what are our policies, what are our procedures, and I also have been saying to folks that we have to look at, like, particularly coming out of slavery, white supremacy is very adaptable, right? And it changes and it transforms, and you go from slavery to sharecropping, and you know, and like when you're forced to integrate schools, okay, we'll close the school and we'll send our kids somewhere else, and we'll create an economic system where the segregation still exists. I live here in New Jersey, we're the 6th most racially segregated state in this country. And part of the reason we do that is by people's net worth, right? If you can afford to live in a certain neighborhood, you can essentially live in a segregated area. So it's dismantling and looking at all these little policies and the way that they add up to a very large problem. Have I done a TEDx talk? No, I haven't. If someone's going to invite me to one, I'll be happy to do it.
I had a question, although I just noticed there's someone new in the chat, so I can yield for the next person.
Not up to me, bro, so I don't know.
Tyler, just go, guy.
Yeah.
Okay. I just like you just brought up again the issue of redlining, and you brought it up earlier in the presentation. I was interested in hearing your thoughts on access to services for people with disabilities, and especially people of color, how redlining can be an issue for not only access to services, but also quality of services.
Yeah, and again, I put it on investment, right? Like, part of the reason why you look to move into a certain community is because of all the amenities that are associated with it, right? So that's the quality of the schools, and open spaces, and that also has to do with services. We also know that, for me as someone with a learning disability, if I don't get that recognized early on and I have to pay for that battery of testing on my own, that's thousands of dollars. And so again, it's one of these ways where the conversation about how redlining contributes to the wealth gap and the resources, the financial resources that people have put to bear to be able to support their children and the members of their family. My father had this stroke, and at one point I was paying 5 people around the clock to provide support in his home. Not everybody can do that, right? Not everybody can do that. So yeah, I think the world that I want to see is one where, particularly over the next few years, we are pouring more investment in the communities that have been underinvested in the past. And again, I still believe that there's a place for the police in our society, but I also think that we are way past due for just making an investment in communities of color. And I think that, you know, everything from, again, quality of water, quality of air, mental health supports. I was just on an interview and someone asked me, you know, how was I able to be so successful? And I think I won the parent lottery. But I also have been doing a lot of therapy to help me deal with all the different ways that I've experienced trauma over my life. And thank God I have I don't pay for an expensive therapist. I go to the county and I've lucked out and got this great lady, right? But I also have health insurance and I have all these things to help me pay for them. So yeah, I think, you know, part of the way in which we create this change is really making targeted efforts into where we're going to invest our dollars and provide those supports. And then the other piece about this, if I can just go on just a little bit more, is even if they're in our community, the people that run those agencies have to, you know, they have to be able to speak the language of the people they're looking to serve, literally, right? And then also as far as the messaging that they do. You can't be scared to go out and interact with the people who are in your community too, right? So again, I think it speaks to hiring practices and overall policy. Because I'm frequently discouraged because I have a sense of what is out there and what's available to folks. But not everybody even knows that they're there because the outreach isn't happening.
So there's another question in the chat that says, can you give us any advice on how to best support diverse and disabled students as white teachers and members of the community, aside from choosing to teach content materials featuring and produced by Black and disabled role models?
So a lot of folks will talk about bias training, like having training and do very targeted training around recognizing our biases within schools and organizations and companies and things along those lines. I also, over the past few months, you know, have been doing a lot of soul searching around this issue, and I think that there is absolutely value in making sure that the literature we teach the folks in history give them is reflective of their own experience. But I also don't think that by just giving someone a book by a Black author, that's automatically going to teach them how to read, right? So you still need solid practices around whether it be literacy or how to provide other services to folks. I also am a huge fan of inclusion, and I think when inclusion is done well, part of that is around people working in teams and collaborating, right? That's the way we solve problems in the real world. And I think also as educators, if you're a white teacher, you should be looking to build as diverse a team as possible by getting as many inputs as possible. Now, that might be pretty challenging. You know, I speak at a lot of educational conferences, and the vast majority of the people who are in front of me are white women, right? And I don't know how it is in New Hampshire, but I got a feeling there's probably a lot of white folks in New Hampshire, right? So as part of building that team, you may have to, and it may be part of what comes out of us doing more work virtually and reaching out to experts outside of your community and what have you. You know, like building that team and learning from other people from diverse experiences. I think that's part of the way it happens. Because I don't think that teaching is a solo sport. I think when it's done well, it's a collaborative effort. It's a bunch of people working together, sharing practices, sharing ideas. And so I think, you know, reaching out, building those bonds with your colleagues who are from diverse backgrounds, I think that's one of the ways in which you can help address the needs of your students. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, so, and feel free to let us know when you're ready to just take one more question.
Let's do one more. I turned off all the AC, so background noise. So I'm sweating. The sun has gone down. I just got this one light. So we'll do one more. We'll stop.
Okay, so this one is from a parent of students with disabilities who's interested in getting more people involved in advocacy. Do you have ideas of how to draw more people of color to be the advocates, much like you're doing? It is happening, but slowly in Virginia. Many people can talk one-on-one, but not so much openly.
Yeah, some of this work is about, you know, start realizing that we have to start small, right? So one of the challenges that organizations, particularly organizations that are founded by white folks, tend to model their own social networks, right? And again, because segregation is still a very real issue in America, if you're just relying upon your own social network, you're gonna have a hard time with that diversity piece. So a lot of it is about making yourself maybe uncomfortable, right? And again, I hate to hark on it, but it's just a really good example. Like, go to Black churches. Like we want everybody, right? Come on in, right? And start making friends, right? But you've also got the Rotary, and you've got you know, the NAACP. I know that an advocate in Nebraska made sure that there was a proclamation around disability supports, particularly for dyslexics. I think it may transfer across the board. That was declared by the National Office of the NAACP. So this is something that they, as an organization, have committed to. Yeah, and you can pick your group, right? And I think the more you can look at, you know, like I found a Black running group, you know, like if you're a painter, where's the painters? You know, if you're a singer, where are the singers? Start there, start building those sort of bonds. And then, you know, also include that conversation about disability. So I think, you know, building those kind of connections and not just relying on our own social group, but stepping outside of that is important.
Thank you.
All right, can I do a quick poem?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I don't have my ADA poem ready yet. I'm gonna go home and work on that. But I do have a poem that I wrote to celebrate the individuals with disability education. And it's called An American Idea. And so I'll do this and then I'm gonna go. But just thank you all for putting this together, and for everyone that has been on. And the questions has been really great. And hopefully we can do this in person. We can get together in person, right? Yeah. Okay, so this is American Idea. It's an American idea. Today's child will be tomorrow's citizen. Education shapes our expression of liberty, and separate, well, that has never been equal. We are the students of a new day, brave scholars who claim desk and classroom, book and school, until the self-evident truths expressed through our victories gave this nation's first declaration renewed life. Each mind is beautiful. Strength has many forms, and we are all able. Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you again for your time and for answering questions. Lisa, let me know if we have time to have conversations with our participants to process some of this conversation as a group.
Yes, we do.
Wonderful. That's great.
Okay, so this is Kathy Johnson from Minnesota,
Hi, Kathy.
part of where everything was going on. And I just want to say this was amazing. And your story, your presentation, your history it needs to be shared to a broader audience. So I thank you to those of you who organize this, and I will do the best I can to help get this word out there. I'm on an island in a small cabin in northern Minnesota to get away from all the noise, but thankfully we have great internet. And so I'm really thankful to be a part of this. And Dan, thank you for organizing this. And I'm just like wowed by everything that was said on this. And I thank you so much. And when the day comes when you can get on a plane, we will get you to Minnesota to share your story, because it's a story that needs to be heard. And Dan, you know me well. We will get you to China to share your story, because I do a lot of work in China. That's all I have to say. I'm just like moved beyond words. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'd like to say again, I'm Isadora from the Council on Developmental Disabilities. I really loved how LeDerick talked about the path to disability pride, right? And thinking about, you know, how other marginalized groups in our society have had similar paths, and just, you know, kind of wondering out loud what we as citizens, as community members, and as organizations, right, those of us that work at organizations, can really do to move that forward.
May I?
Yes.
I am a young adult with a invisible disability, and I think that one of the things that I've been noticing as I am working towards entering the workforce in a more full-time way now that I'm ready, is when I fill out a job application and it asks me to say, you know, to confirm that I have a disability or to choose not to divulge that. It's a real, the way the wording of that question is, I can't tell if it's a good thing or a bad thing. And I think that it would be great to have a little more clarity on that from these different groups that I'm applying to, that we all, you know, apply to, as to whether, you know, whether it is a positive thing or not. I think that that could also influence people's encouragement to have that pride.
Yeah. Thank you. Someone wrote in the chat that you may experience bias, but that doesn't mean it should not be shared or celebrated. And I think that diversity should be celebrated also. Anyone else want to share, want to process their or unpack their feelings?
Yeah, I'm Barbara Coppins. I'm from New Jersey.
Hey, Barbara.
And how you doing? It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Last week I was interviewed by 60 Minutes producer about on the ADA and about the voting and how important it is for people with disabilities and who they, you know, making sure that they vote for the right candidate who they need to vote for, because I know a lot of the policymakers, you know, just about all over besides in my state, and I like to vote for the right person who would do the job for people with disabilities, because we've been working here on the DSPs, you know, the direct support professionals, getting them an increase, and also we've been working on I'm working on a project because I work for Disability Rights New Jersey. It's formerly Protection and Advocacy for 15 years now. And we're working on this project about on the ADA, you know, getting a lot of the self-advocates involved, and get them to tell their stories about, you know, their life, and how they accomplish, and how we getting the younger generation involved to participate, you know, because we need to get them involved, and so they can learn how to be a good role model and be a good leaders, you know. So you know,
That's great, Barbara. Thank you so much for sharing.
yeah, it's nice to
Barbara,
meet.
Barbara, New Hampshire is also doing a great deal of work on the power of the disability vote to ensure that people with disabilities vote in our self-interest and move our issues in the public arena, right? Our vote is our power, so that we can get those policies like
Yeah,
pay for DSPs. So thanks for leading that work in New Jersey, and know that you have sisters and brothers in New Hampshire who are also doing that work too. So thank you.
yeah, you're welcome, and it's nice to meet you on Zoom. I think it's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Barbara. I think that is so important to get the vote out, and I really appreciate your advocacy in that area. This is Kathy Johnson again from Minnesota. Thank you.
Yo, always my pleasure, you know, because I like to be out there doing the work, you know. Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. Deb Offermolly, you have your hand up.
You're on mute.
Oh, does somebody want to ask me a question?
Well, we still don't hear you, Deb.
Oh.
We still can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I am hoping that one of the biases that's really important, that we start developing programs that's inclusive for everyone. And I think of what we perceive of individuals who need high levels of support in community is often left out, and we don't value, we don't even ask sometimes what their opinion is. And so I would hope that we change that. You know, my son is very opinionated. So I'm hoping we do that.
Thank you, Deborah. There is a comment in the chat. I think that LeDerick's story is very inspiring, but also makes me realize how much work there is to do to build these connections in New Hampshire. I'm glad we're having this conversation. It's a great start.
Which I think is a terrific segue into the next part of the conversation, if folks are feeling ready for it. Here in New Hampshire, we have sort of the very nascent early beginnings of some work tying together more closely organizations that work for racial justice and organizations that work for disability justice. I know that Able New Hampshire, we're super small, and we do the best that we can to stay connected. But wouldn't it be terrific? There are 5 co-sponsoring organizations that brought this forward tonight. It would be really terrific if we could maybe talk about our next steps. How do we move forward so that we can solidify? What do we do next to make sure that we don't let this moment go, and how do we best leverage cementing in that our struggles for justice are deeply tied together along the lines of race and disability? So what do you want to do?
I mean, I definitely think that we need to band together more often on events and activities that provide that opportunity for conversations around intersection, like the accessible Black Lives Matter event that happened in Portsmouth recently. I'd love to see more events and activities like that. Sorry, someone else was going to say something.
I know
Is
this
it
is
okay?
Debbie Apinala. The Poor People campaign has officially taken on medical rationing, and we're working with the DRC to do so. And I think that's a great project that we could collaborate together with, because it's actually focused on the disability community, and we might broaden that a little bit. But we voted last night, and that is our topic, that action we were doing.
I was gonna just say that I think that this event was a great starting point for having a conversation on race and disability in the state of New Hampshire. And I think that one of the best ways of doing that is using like platforms like this to amplify voices of disabled people of color. And I definitely think in the future, you know, having more events where there's speakers that can talk about race and disability would be a great way to continue that.
Thank you, Tyler.
So if I could just say that at St. Cloud State University in Minnesota, I'm not in New Jersey, but this is a United States issue that we're dealing with. Sorry. This is Kathy again from Minnesota. And so I just put in the chat room a link to a 30-day celebration of the 30-year anniversary of the ADA. And we have 1 week in particular that is focusing on this exact topic. And so we have lined up speakers during that week. And so one registration will get you the Zoom link for all of our events. But if you only want to tune in for that week, that's fine. And we would love to have you be part of those sessions and part of our dialogue as we're seeking to gain a greater understanding of this topic in the United States. And I mean, all of us know on a global level. So I didn't intend to share this, but since you asked that question, we would love to have you involved. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And when we get to the end, there are a few more events coming up that we'll share, but I want to keep this conversation going. Who's next?
Hi guys, this is Katie Epstein. Can you hear me okay? Okay, just want to make sure because I'm having issues with my phone. But those of you who don't know me, I'm in New Hampshire and I am a board member of the Disability Rights Center. Currently, I'm on many other things. But my question is, we are currently an all-white board because it's New Hampshire, and we're primarily white in the area that I'm currently living in. But we are going to have a meeting shortly at some point within the month to discuss our views on the board, on Black Lives Matter and what's going on. And we, my question is to other boards and other groups, how are you guys, are you making statements on what's going on publicly? And if you are, like, what are you saying in terms of to make it inclusive so that you're not saying, like, we don't want to make it sound like we're against cops, because we're not, and we want to make it so that people understand we want to be inclusive to everybody, no matter what race, disability, creed, whatever. How are you guys navigating that, if you guys understand my question?
So, Katie, it's Lisa B. Here at Able, New Hampshire. Able, New Hampshire did release a statement on racism and police violence. You can find it on Able's Facebook page, or if you want, I will email it to you. So the executive committee of the board of Able got together and reviewed the draft that I wrote. So before it was released, so as a community, we had consensus around the position Able was going to take. And Able, New Hampshire has been, for the past 2 to 3 years, certainly more than 2 years, has been building relationships with organizations that are working on equity for communities of color, and we're just building those relationships, and we are going. We're doing what LeDerick said. We're going to those places where organizations that are looking, moving racial justice in the public arena. We're going to those places and meeting people who are doing that work in those spaces, and we are showing up and building relationships, and that is partially what Able is doing.
And this is Isadora from the DD Council. I can also say that many DD councils around the United States have made statements related to the Black Lives Matter movement, and in particular, in our statement, we cited the statement that the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities put out, which really highlights the issue of intersectionality and racism with disability, and talks about how, disability cuts across every single characteristic in the United States and around the world. So we don't see it as a separate issue. It's part of our conversation.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we are winding down. I think maybe folks are still bubbling with their thoughts, but I think we are winding down, and I would like to request that Able will send out an email to all the participants inviting them to another conversation, and we will in particular invite the people who are representatives of organizations to join in this conversation. And we want to keep this going because it's important work. And I think that our calls and our demands for justice will be better served when we work together. So I want to once again thank the 5 co-sponsoring organizations. That is the Office of Health Equity, Manchester's Inclusivity and Equity Committee of Manchester Proud, Granite State Organizing Project, the Disability Rights Center, the New Hampshire Council on Developmental Disabilities, and ABLE New Hampshire. I do have a couple of announcements of upcoming events. On Thursday, July 30th from 6 to 8 p.m., there is going to be a virtual listening session entitled Education Access in the Time of COVID-19, and that is a group effort of the Governor's Advisory Council on Diversity and Inclusion, as well as the committee that the COVID-19 response committee, and the COVID-19 Equity Task Force. So those 2 organizations have been working separately to deal with a number of deep policy issues, and now they're joining together to do a listening session on Thursday, July 30th from 6 to 8 p.m. And maybe Leah can post a link to that if you want to join that call. You should also know that on Sunday, ABLE New Hampshire is hosting a celebration, yet another celebration of the Americans with Disabilities Act from 10 to 11, where folks can register to obtain a Zoom link, and then we will Facebook live stream everybody in that Zoom meeting to share a few sentences or a few paragraphs on why you love the ADA. It's going to be live streamed for your viewing pleasure in the case that you don't want to participate. But if you do sign up, you can find that link on ABLE's website. And I would like to welcome the Disability Rights Center to share some information about their ADA celebration happening on Thursday, the 23rd at noontime. Stephanie, can you share information about that?
Sure, I am happy to, although it's actually tomorrow at noontime, not on Thursday. So yes, we are having as part of our work on disability in the media with a lot of the sponsors that are working on this too, we're having a conversation about disability in the media. There are 3 national people with disabilities who are all media stars in their own rights in different venues. And Forbes, we have one person who writes for Forbes, one person who is a blogger and activist, and another person who does a lot of work with Rooted in Rights. And if you want to check out more information about that, you're welcome to join us. We would love to have you. Our co-host, Dan Habib, is going to be moderating it. So we're very excited for that New Hampshire connection. You can check for more information on DRC's Facebook page. So you can register for it. It starts tomorrow at noon. And then actually next week on Tuesday, on July 28th, we're going to have a discussion about access to the community and access to the outdoors in collaboration with the Nature Conservancy. And that's going to be really a discussion about what's happening here in New Hampshire, about some work that they're doing to make some additional trails accessible in Manchester and that they've already done up in the Lakes region. And how do we make sure that one of our most valuable resources here in New Hampshire, which is the outdoors, is really accessible to people with all kinds of disabilities. So we're looking forward to that. It's at 5 p.m. on the 28th. And once again, there's information on our Facebook page, or you can always reach out to us and we'll share some more information.
All right, so thank you everyone for attending tonight. Again, there's much to celebrate with the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act coming up this Sunday, but we still have so far a long way to travel to really achieve true equity for people with disabilities. And our work is bound together. We need to work with all communities that are facing inequity, and we need to move justice for all. because if there is injustice anywhere, it is a threat to justice everywhere. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a beautiful evening, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lisa. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. This was wonderful.